I was frankly surprised that Dictator let me stay. He must have assumed that I was going to do whatever he said. Everyone else did, not I, Captain. Besides, how could I possibly be a threat or worthy of his daughter's affection? He was in charge of his family and his band. I was just a lowly guitarist, and musicians were a dime a dozen. At the same time, Dictator was on a high alert for any potential trouble within the ranks. He kept a sharp eye on us and made sure that 99% of the time he was with Selena everywhere she went. Little did he know that Selena and I were still seeing each other in San Antonio and Corpus whenever the band wasn't on the road. Dictator is a psychotic person. I want to say more, but I got to remember I'm on YouTube. But the fact that he went everywhere Selena went, he's just as weird and just as psycho as Yolanda. Them two are a dime a dozen. Well, no, them two are two peas in a pod. A better analogy. Naturally, it hurt my feelings when the others band members shunned me. I thought we were friends, but now they made it clear that nobody had my back. On the other hand, what did I expect? Like me, somebody wanted to lose his job or mess with Dictator. They weren't telling me not to see Selena, so I guess that was their way of showing some support for us. But that was about as far as it went. And at one point, ABCDFG and I were sitting together on the bus when he happened to notice Dictator pacing slowly back and forth on the sidewalk like a weirdo. Below, clearly moping. Cause you ain't getting no action from your relationship. You mad because your daughter getting some action and some real love? How dare you, Dictator? I wanted to go down there and tell Dictator how I felt about Selena, as you should have. You should have not only did that, you should have cursed him out. His pig self, pig looking self, Mr. Piggy. But I knew there was nothing I could say that wouldn't provoke another fit of rage, because he was jealous, because he wasn't getting no action. Dude, I hate this, I said to ABCDFG. Hate what? He asked. I hated that it's so hard for your dad to think about Selena and me being together. Don't worry, ABCDFG reassured me. Dad will get over this. You just have to give him some time. Man, I said to myself, I don't see that ever happen. Despite all of this exhausting tension, Selena and I were still happy together. We always had a great time going out to eat, hanging out at my mom's house in San Antonio, or visiting friends who knew about and accepted our relationship. One day, my favorite memories of a time, I visited Selena in Corpus Christi, and we ended up taking a long walk by the water. We walked all the way to the tip of one of the jetties where we sat and talked about our situation, promising each other once again that nothing could ever tear us apart. As we sat there, Selena put her head on my shoulder and started slowly singing one of my favorite songs, More Than Words, by a phenomenal band called Extreme that I introduced to her not long ago. Those lyrics seemed to describe our feelings for one another perfectly. I had never been more content than I was at that moment, sitting on that jetty in Corpus and having Selena next to me. How amazing it was. I thought that this woman I loved so much would sing for me, and me alone, in her credible voice, as the water sparkled silver beneath a wide blue Texas sky. After Selena passed away, Extreme came to Corpus to play. The band dedicated that song to her because I had met them once and told the lead singer how much Selena loved the lyrics. But that was later, after everything. The day that Dictator finally threw me out of the Los Dinos started out like any other day. We were again traveling on the bus. We had just finished a show, and we were all sitting up towards the front. The atmosphere still crackled with tension. The band members were clearly getting tired of this whole situation and mostly ignoring me. I'm sure that they wish I'd leave so that peace could ring in their world again. No single discussion on or event sparked Dictator's anger. He's always angry. All he needs is some action, if you know what I mean. Then he'll be just as happy as anybody in love would. But because he's so backed up from from passion, he's just mad at everything and everyone. But his blood was boiling. Looking back on that day, I'm guessing that he could have been obsessing over a possibility that Selena and I were sneaking around, and he just couldn't take it anymore. Yeah, he's the right word, obsessed. Obsessed. I love Marcella. She's a sweet lady, but she let that man do everything, anything to everybody. But he is the male version of Yolanda. Whatever reason, as we were driving home from the show, Dictator hit the brakes, pulled the bus over to the side of the road, turned around and started yelling at me from the driver's seat. That's it. This is over between you and Selena. It stops now. This is not going to happen. And if I was Chris, I would have said, watch it. Watch it happen. I would have been kissing. If I was Chris, I would have been kissing on Selena, hugging on Selena every every time Dictator walked in the room, just to piss him off, because he needs that. He needs a dose of his own medicine, because he thinks he's the smartest man in that family, but he actually is not. Because the more you nitpick and the more you prevent something from happening, it's going to happen, because that just makes the person or the situation more curious. That's why it's so important for parents to not always shelter their kids, because they end up being rebellious, or they end up being curious of, doing, well, that's the same thing, doing things that they probably shouldn't do or should wait on. But you should let the child figure out on their own, especially if they're grown. She was a grown woman. She wasn't a child. And you're preventing her from being in love. And that's what made them get married sooner than later. Because he kept nitpicking at them and kept trying to keep them apart, when all it did was make them want to be around each other even more. He's not the smartest person in the world. And that's why he's just miserable. He's just miserable because he did a lot of that. He did a lot of nitpicking, and he did a lot of sheltering from his kids, and that's why some of his kids is either rebellious, like in a way that causes them to be in trouble from the law, A, B, C, D, F, G. Another one being rebellious by, getting married sooner than later, Selena. And another one who acts just like Dictator and wants to take, Susie Q. It don't make no sense. I glanced out of the window, quickly weighing my options. We had been in a small town just a few miles back. Dictator had at least pulled the bus off the road. I could walk back to that town and call a friend to pick me up if things on the bus got too intolerable. Still shouting, Dictator was now walking towards me, yelling at both Selena and me about how we tried to play him for a fool. You played yourself a fool, Dictator. Nobody played you a fool. You just jealous. All you need to do is get some loving, and maybe you'll be a little bit more pleasant around certain situations, because that was too out of line, and it was not that serious. This thing between you and Chris, whatever it is not going to happen. Try me. He shouted at Selena. He has nothing to offer you. And you do. And you do. All you do is live your dream through your children. You have nothing to offer but pain, misery, lies, taking, stealing, anger. That's what you offer. Selena started arguing with him. Sometimes I think Selena has Chris. I'm sorry to say, but I feel like that's what it is. I feel like Selena wore the pants in the relationship, and that she had him because she actually, yeah, that's her father, so she probably feel more in tune to do that. But he's a man as well. He's a man, and if you feel, if you see that your woman's dad is disrespecting not only you but your woman, then you should stand up for yourself and get in his face politely, but get in his face and tell him, you're not going to talk to her like that. You're not going to talk to me like that. And that's it. And that's all. And if we're in love, we're grown and we can do what we want to do. We're not hurting nobody. It's just you being a dictator trying to dictate everybody's life, and that's not going to happen anymore because we're grown. Like, that's what he should have done. But Selena was the one that was being more vocal and more aggressive with it, and more aggressive with everything with the relationship, because she was the reason why they got married. It wasn't him. She convinced him, because she was like, I'm not gonna let my father control us. And that's why I'm like, sometimes I feel like Selena is the most bravest and the most aggressive one in the relationship, when it should have been Chris, or it could have been mutual. But I mean, I guess he was just trying to be. He's just too nice and too respectful. But look where it got you. It got this man to this day, taking advantage of him. Meanwhile, I felt caught. I knew that if I reacted the way I really wanted to, by jumping in and shouting to express my own anger at the insults Dictator was hurling in my direction, things could only get worse. So what? Take the risk. You standing up for somebody you love. Because it really comes off like he's scared. It comes off like maybe she don't mean that much to me because I'm not even defending her. Don't worry about what people would say. Don't worry about how it may get worse. You don't know unless you try. You're doing the right thing by defending who you love and defending your relationship, because the dictator, was in the wrong, not them. So he should have gotten his face. He should have expressed his anger. Maybe Dictator will respect him more. But see, I think that's why Dictator treats him like that, because he knows, he feels the fear in Chris. Even though Chris isn't afraid, but it comes off that way. He's just being respectful. But Dictator sees it as him being afraid. And that's why Dictator kept taking advantage of him and talking to him any kind of way. Because I bet if Chris' stepfather and biological father was around, I bet Dictator would not be acting and talking to him the way he was. Because mind you, I will read proof of that later on in the video. But let's continue. I suddenly felt exhausted, thinking, really? This has to happen? Why? It must have looked like I was just passively sitting there. Yes, it does. Grow some balls, Chris. Taking everything Dictator threw my way. Finally, I got out of my seat and stood next to Selena to show my support. Dictator glared at me. You know what you are? You are a cancer in my family. And that's low to the low. Why would you say something like that to anybody? It's just, And I bet he never apologized to him. Don't talk to him like that way, Selena yelled. I love Chris and he loves me. That's something that Chris should have said. But instead, he was just sitting there watching. He should have said that, not Selena. Or both. Like, come on. Of course he loves you. Of course he loves you, Dictator shouted back. You're beautiful and you're rich. No, that's probably what you perceived her as. And that's probably what you perceived Marcella when y'all were young. That she was beautiful and that's why you loved her. That's not what love is, just on physical appearance. Maybe that's how he fell in love with Marcella, because he was basing it on, yes, the first thing you see is appearance, granted. But then once you see and grasp the person's personality, that determines whether you're in love or not. And if that personality meshed with yours. They went back and forth while I stood there. I was more hurt than angry that Dictator would say those things. I understood why he was afraid of losing Selena, but he known me long enough to know I wasn't the kind of guy who would be motivated by money. If this foolishness continues between you two, I'm going to end this band. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. But he used that as an engine to stop the relationship, because he knew that was the ending the band would stop everybody money. But we all know he's not going to do that, because if he stops the band, the idiot would not get any money on his own. So he not going to do that. And I wish they was more logical and thought that, nah, he ain't going to really do that. They should have said, well, we're not going to stop. Dictator declared when Selena wouldn't back down, which Chris should have done too. I glanced around the bus. I knew that Dictator would never end the band. If you knew that, then why didn't you? It meant too much to him. But I saw that everybody else looked pretty freaked out. I felt more exhausted than that. Don't worry about what everybody else thought, because if they think logic like you, then they would know that he ain't gonna really end the band. And you should have just spoke up for yourself. I felt more exhausted than ever. You should feel exhausted of being a punk. I'm sorry. I'm letting it all out. I just wanted out. I was tired of having these nervous feelings, like I was doing something wrong by falling in love with Selena. You weren't doing anything wrong. I was sick of being around Dictator. Dictator, that's all he is a freaking... I shouldn't throw that word around, but that's what he act like. Who was doing everything possible to make my life miserable. In the middle of the argument, just like that, I said, I'm out of here. Screw this. I'll find my own way home. I don't want to ride in here anyway. You can't leave, Selena cried. I gave her a quick embrace. He's your dad, Selena, I whispered. I love you, but this is too much stress for me. I have my family, and this is yours. She knew I was right. There was nothing else that could happen. Yes, it was, but whatever. Certainly, Dictator and I weren't going to be able to smooth things out. My talk by talking. He was too angry and upset for what happened. I got off, took a few deep breaths of cool night air, and started walking along the highway as the bus pulled back onto the road with a roar of exhaust. I've left one of my guitars on the bus when I walked off that night. A few days later, I asked Jesse, a good friend of mine, to get the guitar for me when Selena y Los Dinos played in San Antonio. After Jesse told me what happened, as he had searched out the road crew and asked for my guitar, Abraham approached him. I said his name. Knew that Jesse and Selena were friends because he had heard a message from Jesse recently on Selena's phone. Why are you going through her phone? Like, this is giving me Yolanda. Like, come on. What do you want to talk to Selena about? Dictator demanded. Girlfriend problems. Jess said. This is the truth. What about your friend Chris? Dictator asked. Is he still seeing Selena? I don't know. Jess said. Come on, Dictator said. You're best friends, right? I know Chris tells you everything. Don't try to bull BS me. Oh, so Dictator cussing now. But I thought you were so holy and religious. Lies you tell. What do you have against them being together? Jess asked. Dictator laughed. Chris has nothing to offer. You have nothing to offer, piggy. He got no money and no future. He just a bum musician. And you were too, when you were with the Los Dinos, when you was the lead singer. Look at where it got you. Grubbing for money off your kids. You were a bum musician, because if you weren't, you would have been selling albums on your own without having your kids to do it for you. He's my friend, Jesse said. I don't want to hear you talk that way. And he and Selena love each other. Chris and Selena aren't going to be together, Dictator shouted as Jess turned away to leave. Because I was no longer with Los Dinos, Dictator had no way of keeping tabs on me. Selena told me that the band members, though supportive of us as a couple, were frankly relieved that I was off the bus. ABCDFG had hired back their old guitarists, and that was that, or so everyone thought. I knew that Selena and I were going to stay together. I wasn't thinking about marriage at that point. Selena and I were still kids. You were young to be married, but you weren't kids. Stop, Allison. Y'all were over 21. But I definitely knew that I was in love and wanted to be with her. Back in San Antonio, I continued living in my father's apartment and playing music. I felt free now to tell everyone about my relationship with Selena and what had happened. With her family, it was odd, in a way, to find myself surrounded by people who love me. I've been immersed in Selena's family and in Los Dinos for so long that I've forgotten what it felt like to have so much support. I'm reminded of how good my friends and family are. I started playing music with my friends Rudy and Albert. We managed to land some gigs, and I made decent money. All in all, I was doing fine, more than fine for me. The pressure was off. I talked to Selena regularly on the phone, and we saw each other whenever and however we could. She was still on the road a lot, but that was okay. I was busy working on weekends, and she was too. We still had our weekdays together. Freed of that nerve-wracking situation with her father and the other members of Los Dinos, I started to enjoy my life again. Selena, though, was still suffering, having to live with the guilt of sneaking around with me behind her father's back. She was filled with that same nervous energy I'd been feeling before I got out of the band. Selena had always been a risk taker, but that energy compelled her to do some even crazier things while we were apart. One night, for instance, Selena called to say that she'd been hurt herself bungee jumping. What did you did what? I frowned at the phone receiver, so sure I heard her wrong. I hadn't. Selena had been at a carnival with friends. One of the attractions that was a tall platform where you could climb up the ladder, put on a harness attached to a bungee cord, and jump off. Selena had twisted her back and fell, and even went to see a chiropractor, yet the pain was still acute. What the heck were you thinking doing something like that? I asked, what was going through your head to make you want to do that? They dared me, she said. I had to laugh as I discovered with Selena it was a mistake to dare her to do anything because 99.9% of the time she would take that dare. So how do you feel to do it? I asked. It was pretty scary jumping off and towards the ground, she said. But the really scary part was just when I was breathing a sigh of relief. The cord pulled me back up and I knew I had to come back down again. The second time was definitely the worst than the first. I would never do that again.